Hey coders, welcome back to my channel and into the Fullstack web development series where we are building a Glassmorphic style real estate website. This is video number 13 in this series, and today we are finally going to connect with database and make this website properly dynamic. And for that we need to bring in our database. So for that we have to again go to buy me a coffee page, because there I have uploaded the database along with all the data in the rows as well as all the links to the images that has been used in this website. Again, it's not mandatory. I'll be explaining all the fields that we have in the database. So if you want to create the database on your own, you are welcome to do that as well. But if not, you have other option available as well. Okay, so let's go to my page. And for that, you have to come back to my page on buymeacoffee.com and let's go to the shop. Let's come down here and we have this real estate database. This product not only contains the database along with all the data in it, but it also contains a file which has all the links for the images that has been used in this website. So you have to simply get that project, and once you get it, you will receive it in the downloads like this real estate DB over here. And then what you have to do is that you have to extract it, and once you extract it, you will get a database.sql file. This is the whole database along with all the data, and this one contains all the links to the images that has been used. So you can download all the images from these links. And then you have to come back to the PHP MyAdmin. Over there, let's create a new database. Let's give it the name RealEstate_DB. Create. Now you have to click on the import. Click on choose file, and over here let's go to the folder, and over here it says real estate DB. Keep all the defaults and then click on this import. So if you notice these check marks over here, import has been successfully finished, 24 queries executed. So everywhere you see there is this check mark, this tick mark. That means we have successfully imported all the data and all the tables, basically schema as well as the data in the tables. So this is our database name, and then we have basically these two tables. The user one, we won't be using it over here in this project. We only have these two tables that we are interested in. Let's click on the property, and if you notice, it already contains all the data. So it has fields property ID, then property name, address, city, country, postcode. Sorry, this is county and this is country. Then we have property type like condominium, detached, apartment, townhouse, semi-detached, things like that. And then the area of the property in square feet, number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, price, rent. So price is for the properties which are available in the market to be sold, and rent is for the properties which are available to be let out in the market. So, and then we have status, if this property is available or not. Currently all of them are available. And then we have this listing type, again, which tells us if it's a for sale property or for rent. We need this status because let's say there is a property in the market to be put up on the rent. Once it gets rented out, then the viewer should not be able to see this property again. But let's say after a few months, the property gets available in the market again. So rather than deleting the entry for this property and then inserting it back again, once the property is available in the market again, you can change the status over here. This way, all the information is already there. If the property gets sold out or gets rented out, you just change the status. If it's again gets put up in the market for it to be sold out or rented out, then you can simply change the status over here. Then this is the description that you see on the page, the year it was built in, and this is basically a JSON object which contains all the features of the property. For example, if it has pools, gyms near school or things like that. Then this is the two fields which gets created by the MySQL created it and updated it is featured. This will, if this is set to true, then it will be visible in the is featured section over here. So over here. And this is featured date, featured reason. For example, if it's a luxury apartment or it's a popular school catchment area, things like that. Or the price has been dropped, stuff like that. Okay. Now then this property table is linked with images table using this property ID. So this is the primary key, property ID. Then in the images table, we have these fields: image ID, property ID, image URL, and description. This is primary key for this particular table, but through this property ID, which becomes the foreign key through which these tables are linked with properties in this property table. And then the image URL just contains the name of the image. Description has been kept null. So this is how you can download not only the schema, but the data as well. And for the images, you can either go to each of these URLs and download the image, or you can use any random images. You don't have to use the same images that I have used. But if you go through this route, then the links are all provided over here. You simply just copy these in the address bar and download the image in the images folder. Now let's continue to the project. Okay, so now the first thing that we are going to do over here is not in the views. Let's click on the core. In the core folder, we are going to create a class named database. Now using this class, we are going to interact with our database. So let's bring in the namespace first. Namespace is source, then core folder. Okay, now the class is database. Okay, so we will be using the PDO objects over here. Since we are using the namespaces, so in order to avoid the confusion, we are going to explicitly mention where these PDO objects are defined. So therefore, we are going to use this use backslash. This backslash is very important because this will tell the PHP that we are using the global namespaces, which are already defined. We are simply using them over here. So use PDO and then use PDO exception as well. Okay. Next, in the database class, let's define certain properties. So private properties. First one is going to be the host, which will have the value, default value is localhost. Copy paste it. The second one is going to be username, and in my case it's root, which is the default username for the MySQL systems. Then password, it's empty by default. We also need database name, so we are using RealEstate_DB. And then we need a connection variable as well, which is null by default. Now let's create a constructor function. Now because we are using PDO and PDO exceptions, that means we can include our code in try and catch blocks. So let's create a data source name variable, DNS. DNS usually stands for DSN. Data source name, and for that we are going to use so for this domain source name we have to define two parts, the driver as well as the host, where that host is present. So the driver is, in our case, it's MySQL, and then for the host we are going to define, let's put in these curly brackets over there, we are going to enclose the variable, which is this one, host. So this will define the host. So basically we are telling it that we are defining MySQL driver and the host is present at this particular IP address. Then we have to put in semicolon. Then the second part is we also have to define the database name. So DB name equals or assign, again, curly brackets. These curly brackets are not part of this statement that we are generating, but simply it makes it more explicit that this thing is actually a variable name. That's it. If we like, we can skip these curly brackets altogether. So database name is this one. Copy and paste it over here, semicolon as well, and then let's close this statement. So this part is simply telling us what is the data source name, that is from which source we will get the data or which source we will connect to and using which driver, which is MySQL. Okay, so this is half information. Now we are going to use this connection property because we are ready to connect with this source. So this connection equals or assign new PDO. So we have to, as a first parameter, we are going to pass in this DSN, data source name. And now over here, we have to provide the username and password using which we can connect with this DSN. I was supposed to add in this over here because we are using the properties. So this over here as well. Now over here, this username. And the second parameter is going to be this password. Okay, so this will return as a new PDO object which gets stored in this variable or this property, connection property. Then we can set certain attributes on this connection object as well. For that, we are going to use This connection object has certain methods, so we are going to use set attribute. So over here, we are going to let this connection object know that if you encounter any error or any exception, raise it explicitly. So if you don't set this attribute, the exceptions are raised, but we aren't necessarily made aware of them. So we want those exceptions to be explicitly thrown, and then we resolve them accordingly. So this is what we are doing, set attribute, and then PDO double colon attribute ATTR underscore error mode. So this is a particular attribute that we want to target or change its default value. So we want this to be set to, let's copy this, paste it over here, remove this underscore attribute ATTR. So PDO error mode underscore exception. The default value of this error mode attribute is error mode silent. If we don't set it to error mode exception, then whenever any error is thrown, the system fails silently, or it displays an error message in the form of false, like something couldn't execute, so false, it returns as false. So it doesn't explicitly tell us what the error is. So that's why we are setting this attributes property from default to exception. So this way, if any error occurs, it will be thrown as an exception, and we will be able to see, read, understand, and act accordingly. Okay. And then what we want to do is that we want to echo this message, connection successful. However, if we encounter any problem and this connection has not been assigned a new PDO object, then we will get into the catch block. So PDO exception $EXEEP, or let's make it just E. In the body, let's use the die method. That means we want to terminate along with the message. Connection failed. And then let's add in the message, the exact message, get message. Okay, so this is the constructor method of the database. Now let's define other methods which will connect with the database to execute some queries. So public function, let's first of all use the get featured method to define or get only the featured properties. So basically, the properties that we view over here will be visible to us. So we are only trying to access all the featured properties. Now, if you go to the database, if you remember, the property table has a field named, where is it? This one is featured. It's a Boolean field. So 1 means true, 0 means null. So whatever rows have been set as true, we want to get all of those rows. What we are going to do is that we are also going to use a default table name as well. This way we don't have to use this table name everywhere. We just have to use this variable. So the default table name is property. So let's define a basic select statement. Select everything from table named table where is featured is true. So this is featured, if you remember, is a column in the property table. Okay, so this is the property table, and this is featured is either 1 for true and 0 for false. So we are saying wherever this is featured property is set to true, return all of those statements. So for the time being, it's just a statement. Now we have to execute this query. So for that, we are going to call on the connection object a method named query. And to that, we are going to pass this variable query, which stores the SQL statement that we want to be executed. So this query will return us either a statement object or it will return as false. So it will return as false if this query has not been successfully executed. Otherwise, it will return us a PDO statement object. So we are going to store it in this statement variable. So this will either be false or it will contain a PDO statement object. This will return as false if for some reason the query couldn't be executed successfully. Otherwise, it will always return us a PDO statement object. So what we can do is that we can check. Basically, we want to return the data. So return, keyword, return, and then we are going to check. So if this statement contains object, then we want to get all the rows that has been returned or that are currently stored in this PDO statement object. We want those rows to be returned as an associative array. So for that, what we are going to do is that we are going to say statement fetch all, because most likely it's going to be more than one row. So it's going to be an array of rows. So therefore we are going to use the method fetch all, but we want them to be returned as a associative array. So PDO double colon fetch underscore assoc. That means fetch the data as an associative array. Basically, we are returning all the rows at once as an associative array. So each element of the array is going to be an associative array itself. However, if that is not the case, that is, this is false, in that case, we want to return an empty array. Okay, so before we define anything else, let's test this out. If we are able to successfully connect and use this method, that means everything is working fine and we can keep on building on this thing. This class database is nowhere near completion, but we are going to halt its further development and we are going to let's go to the controllers. Okay, let's go to the home controller, and over here, let's bring in source, core, and database. Now in the index method, we are going to create an instance of this database class. Or what we are going to do is that we are going to define a private property named database. And in the constructor, so let's define a constructor, public class underscore underscore construct. Now since we have to create a instance of database over here, so to this one, this property, this database, we are going to create an instance of database, new database. Sorry, $sign is missing. Okay. This DB equals new database. Now, syntax error. What is the syntax error? Okay, class. It's supposed to be function. Public function construct. And over here, we are creating an instance of database. So when we do this, we have basically a PDO object with this connection variable. Okay. So now in the index method, we are going to call this getFeatured method. So data is going to be stored this database getFeatured. So we are calling getFeatured on this database object, and whatever is returned is stored in this data variable, and now to this home we are passing in the data. If everything goes smoothly, then in the view home.twig, we should have this data. So what we are going to do is that we are in the featured section over here. After this H2, we just simply want to dump the data and see what do we get. Okay. Let's refresh, and we got an error. Connection is successful. Warning, undefined variable table on database line 27. Syntax error or access violation. You have an error in the SQL syntax. Okay, do you think because this semicolon is missing, select everything from table where is featured equals true? No, nothing. Oh, again, I forgot to bring in this. Refresh. Something else. Call to a member function fetch are on null. On null. Let's delete this part and see if we are able to get everything from this table. Refresh, and still undefined variable statement on line 29. Let's paste it back so it's something else. Statement this connection query. Oh, got it. This S is capital. Let's make it lowercase. Refresh. Call to a member function render on null. Where on controller 11 render null. Why is it null? Let's use print R and see what actually are we getting as a result of executing this getFeatured. So we have data over here. So why is it complaining that render has call to a member function render on null? Okay, so I have identified the problem. Well, the problem lies for this home controller. if you notice, we have just defined this constructor. So earlier we did not have this constructor. So what was happening was, when an object of type HomeController was created, its default constructor was getting automatically executed. And because this HomeController was extending this controller, so that constructor was automatically calling the default constructor of this controller class as well. But the moment we define the constructor ourselves, now that chain of one constructor calling its parent constructor breaks down. So over here, we have to make sure that that chain is intact. So before we define any logic for this constructor, first of all, we have to ensure that that chain has been restored. So to restore that chain, we are going to say parent __ construct. So first of all, we are restoring the chain of one constructor calling its parent's default constructor. So when that chain has been restored, then this constructor gets executed. As a result, the Twig service gets instantiated, and then this render method will not be null because this render is part of this controller. Okay, so let's go back. So hopefully now it has restored everything. Now first we are restoring the chain of constructors. Then we are creating an instance of database. Now over here, I don't think we need to use this anymore. Refresh. Okay, so let's go to the featured. Okay, so data is gone again. So before we check our code, let's inspect and view the page source just to make sure it's not behind some image. Okay, so as you can see, nowhere we can see the data that we receive from the backend. However, we are seeing this connection successful message. So that means for some reason the data is not being passed to the Twig. Well, in fact, the problem is, let's go back to the HomeController. Now let's uncomment this once more and write exit so that we don't see the images or the front end logic. Let's refresh. And if you notice, so this part is the data that we are receiving. So it's an array. Each element of this array, so the top level array is index 1. So this is index 0 and this is index 1. So the top level array is not named array, it's indexed array. Now the Twig needs the names of the variables in order to display them. But these elements, so the top level elements becomes the individual variables. Like had this been, instead of 0, had this been some name, let's suppose first, second, third, or something else, then we could have referred to this whole array using the name mentioned over here. But because it's not named array, it is indexed array, so indexes cannot be converted into names. So that's the problem that we are encountering. The Twig requires our data elements to be named, especially the top level elements. But in our case, the top level array is indexed array, it's not named array. So we have to fix this problem. Now the way to fix this problem is, let's comment both of these statements and over here, cut this part and convert this into an associative array by enclosing this within square brackets. So the name of the index is going to be data, and the value is going to be the variable data. So now the top level array is not an indexed array, it's a named array. So the array that we are now sending to the Twig has one element whose name or index is data, and everything, the whole multidimensional array that we received, we are passing it as its value, this element's value. So now we can access using this data. So hopefully now it resolves the problem. Let's refresh. Okay, now it says array to string conversion on template.php. So the problem is, this is an array and we are straight away displaying it. So instead what we can do is, we are going to use for statement. So for property in data, so each property at a time. Now this property will represent one whole row. So we are just interested in property, and it has, let's go to the table and let's start with the property name. So capital P property and N is capital as well. Property name. Let's refresh. Unexpected topping operator of value. Oh, sorry, because it behaves like an object. So this property at a time represents the whole row, and this one is one property at a time. Refresh. Featured. So it's displaying all the names. So modern condo, urban loft, seaside cottage, and countryside farmhouse. Let's put in line break. Okay, so you can see the names. So now we are ready to make these properties get displayed dynamically. Okay, so now what we need to do is, let's cut this part, and inside the listing container, let's paste it back. Let's comment this as well. And now what we need to do is that let's cut this one listing. So we have one listing. Let's cut it and put it over here. Paste. Okay, so the class name is listing. Now the image source is going to be Realtor Backend Assets Images, and the name will come from, because images are actually in another table. So let's keep this static for the time being. Let's move on. Class too late. Okay, too late. Let's skip this one as well. Property title. Oh, for this one, let's copy this part and place it over here. So the title is property name. Then the city. So for the city, let's delete London, paste it over here, and the name property dot city. Okay, then type. The type is coming from listing type. Now the area. The area is coming from size SQ feet, square feet. Size SQ FT. Okay, then bedrooms. Bedrooms, okay. Then bathrooms. And then rent, again, we have to replace this if it's a rented one or it's to be available to be bought or sold. We are going to fix this in a bit, but let's see in this current state, what do we get in the browser? So we have one static listing. Now let's refresh. And now we are getting 4 dynamic properties. The image is same because we haven't yet changed the image. But if you notice, the title is different for each of these properties. This one is in City Leeds. This one is City London. This one is Leeds, Brighton, Oxford. So you can already see that we are getting dynamic data from our backend. So now the only thing that we have to change is if it's a rented property, we want to see the line over here. It should be red. Otherwise, it should be green. And if it's a rented property, we should see rent over here. Otherwise, we see the price over here for the properties which are in the market to be sold. So we are going to fix this, but let's fix this. Then we are going to fix the images, because for the images, we have to bring in the other table. So let's go to the tables. Listing type. Okay, so this for sale and for rental is listing type. The property type is condominium, detached, and these different values. So let's fix this first. Okay, this is property type. Okay, so now we have this div. So what we are going to do is that we are going to check. So over here, what we are going to do is that we are going to use if statement. So if, let's go back to the table. So over here, if listing type equals rental, then include to let div, otherwise include to buy div. So if property dot listing type, if listing type equals rental, if this is equal to the property listing is equal to rental, then include this div. Else, copy, paste, and change the class name from to let to buy, and make it to buy as well. Let's verify. Okay, so this one is available to be bought. So this is green, to let, and to buy has been turned into green. Now why each of them has value 800. Okay, because it's static. Okay, so now we have to fix this part as well. So what we can do is we are going to take the same approach of using this if statement. So copy, and over here, let's paste this if block. Instead of checking the rent or prices, we can stick with listing type. If the listing type is rental, its rent column will have value. If the listing type is something other than rental, its price column will have value. We are keeping the condition same, but over here, instead of this div or this div, let's copy or cut this div, cut it, and paste it over here. Then the class, we are inserting the paragraph with the class name rent. The contents are okay. The content rent is fine. However, let's make this part dynamic. So property dot rent, and let's copy this, paste this. Okay, so I'm guessing we will have a class named by, and over here, instead of property dot rent, it's going to be price. And let's change this to price as well. Let's refresh. Okay, so for the green, we are seeing the price. For the red, we are seeing the rent by price. Okay, so this has been fixed. Now let's move on to bringing in the images. And since these images are in a different table, so we have to modify our query so that it can bring the data from both of these tables. For that, we are going to use left join, but using left join alone will not be enough. So we will also be using subquery. So let's go to the database, phpMyAdmin. Let me open up a new browser tab. Okay, so let's go to the properties now. We are on the properties. Okay, fine. So if you notice, these are all the property IDs. Now, first row has property ID 1, second has property ID 2, likewise 3, 4. These property IDs are primary keys and therefore they are unique as well. And if you notice, we have in total 47 rows. So that means we have 47 properties in our database. Now, if we go to the images images table, if you notice, we have in total 231 rows. So way more rows for the properties. That is because if you notice, the first 5 rows have property ID 1. So that means all of these 5 rows belong to one property. So we have 5 images for the first property. Then row 6 to row 10, they all have property ID 2. So that means the next 5 rows or next 5 images belong to property number 2. Our property table is linked with the images table through the foreign key, this one, property ID. So this one is the foreign key through which we are linked with this property table. And over here, this property ID is the primary key. Okay, let's start with the basic query. So currently the query that we have is select everything from the table name over here is property where is featured equals true. So let's define this. Select everything from property where is featured equals true. Execute it. So we get in total 4 rows because 4 of them have is featured set to true. Okay. Now we have to bring in the images. So now if we modify this, let's bring this down. Select everything from property. So now what we are going to do is that we are going to use left join and bring all the data from all the rows. So when we use left joins, you have to give aliases to your tables. So property, let's give it the alias P. So over here, we have to make it P dot asterisk, means everything, all the columns from the properties table. But we also need image URL, which is the name of the image from the images table. So we will assign that images table an alias I. So I dot image URL. So this is the name of the column that we are interested in. Now come back here on the next line. So select everything from properties table and image URL from the images table. Now we have to use left join images table and the alias is I. Let's come to the next line. And now we have to define how these two tables are connected together. So that comes in the on clause. So we are going to say on I dot, now this one has a column named property ID on I dot image ID, not image ID, we are interested in property ID. Property ID on I dot property ID equals P dot property ID. So the way we are joining these two tables is by matching the property ID in the images table with the property ID in the properties table. So this way it will take one row from the property table and then it will match it against all the rows in the images table. But only 5 rows will match this condition. So for the first property, it will create 5 rows where the data from the property table will be same, but the data for the images table will be different for all of those rows. But if we like, we can comment this part out. Where is featured is true, this will return us all the rows. However, if you want to see the small set of data so that we can understand, we are going to keep this condition intact, where is featured is true. So this will only return the is featured properties, but all of their images. So since we have 4 properties whose is featured is true, and each of the properties have 5 images, so we will be most likely returned 25 rows. Let's execute it. Okay, we have been returned. So I made my basic maths calculation was incorrect. So 5 times 4 is 20, not 25. Okay, so we have been returned 20 rows. Now, if you notice, so this is property ID. The first 5 have property ID 1 because everything is going to be same. If you notice, the name is same, the address is same, city is same. However, at the end, we will have a different image URL for all of them. So this is how they have been joined. Now, the thing is this, for the featured properties, we don't want all the images. We only want one image per property. Once we click on any of these cards and we are sent to the property page where it shows all the images of that property, over there we will be needing all the images. But right now we need just one image, not all of them. So now we have to bring into the mix a subquery. So the subquery that we are bringing into the mix is, so we have to make changes over here on the on clause because this is the condition of the condition of joining the tables. So we are going to change this part. So before we define the clause, let me remind you once more that the way the join work is that it takes one row from the property table because this table is being left joined with images table. So it will take one row at a time from this property table and it will match it against all the rows in the images table. And wherever the property ID from this row matches the property ID in the images table, all of those rows will be joined together and returned us. So now instead of doing that, what we are going to say is, for each property ID in the property table, return the row from the images table whose image ID is the smallest of all the rows that matches with this property ID. So let me say it again. Of all the images that match this condition, return the smallest image for that particular property. So we have to now modify it over here. So over here we are going to say, instead of saying this part, we are not going to say this part. Rather, we are going to say on I.image ID is equal to the smallest image ID which matches this condition. So this condition will return us 5 rows. Now we have to say the smallest of those images. So we are going to use a subquery, therefore parenthesis. So select. Now again we have to reuse this images table. So we have to give an alias, a different alias than this one. So we will be giving it alias i2 dot image URL. Select i2 dot image URL from images I2, where cut this part and place it over here where instead of I, make it I2, where I2.property ID equals property P.property ID. But again, this select will return us 5 rows per property ID. So we have to now make it to 1 row. So Control X and use a function called minimum and paste back. So not URL, we are saying image ID because now we are making the comparison based on image ID. So now is the subquery will return us the minimum of image IDs per property. If you ignore this minimum for the time being, this select statement says return us the image ID from the images table where the images property ID is equal to properties property ID. So this will return us 5 rows and now we are enclosing this image ID into this minimum function. So out of those 5 rows, whichever row has the smallest ID, only that row will be returned or that minimum ID will be returned. So whatever is the minimum ID that will be returned and against which this minimum ID will be matched. So this way for each property, we will only receive 1 row. Let's execute this statement to verify. So now we have been returned 4 rows. So these are the property IDs, property ID 1, 5, 7 and 10. And if we go to the end and you can see the front1.jpg, front5.jpg, front7.jpg and front10.jpg have been returned to us. So different images for different properties. So I hope you have understood this query, even though it's not easy to comprehend, but I have tried my best. Okay, so I hope that's clear. However, let's just open this properties table in another tab. So if we go to the columns, we should have one more column. This one is status. So this status available means this property is available in the market, but it can be unavailable at any time. So we have to make sure that we don't by accidentally list a property over here which has already been taken. So if we have to ensure that, we are going to use and p.status equals available, available. Okay, let's execute it. And we still got the same rows. Okay, so available. Okay. So now we are ready to use this statement in our PHP. Copy this. Let's come to the code editor and paste it over here. Let's comment this part out. Select p.asterisk from i.image URL from property p. Let's remove this part. From property p, left join images I on. Okay, where states. Okay, so let's enclose everything within double quotations and assign it to this query variable. Copy, paste. So query is select all the columns from the properties table, image URL from the images table, from property p, left join images I on i.image id equals select minimum of i2.image id from images i2, where i2.property id equals p.property id, where is featured equals true, and p.status equals available. Okay. We don't need to make any changes over here. We will still receive the same associative array. However, now in the home.twig, we are ready to make changes over here for the source attribute of the image tag. So over here, so what we are going to do is that we are going to enclose this whole part within double curly brackets. Okay. And then the string over here within single quotations. Now this is string, then concatenation symbol in twig, which is this tilde sign, and then property dot image URL. So we need these double quotations because the source path needs to be enclosed within the quotations. So that's why outer double quotations. Then within these curly brackets, double curly brackets, this part is string with single quotations, so that these quotations don't interfere with the outer double quotations. Then we are concatenating it using this tilde sign with the property.image URL variable. Let's see if it works. Refresh. And we are successfully getting different images per property. Okay, so now we have successfully managed to bring in dynamic pages per property as well. I think that's enough for today's video. We will continue in the next video. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please do not forget to comment, like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much. Happy coding.